Welcome everybody, Mr. Allen here. We're going to go step by step through building a histogram today using Excel specifically, but if you have access to Google Sheets instead, that's perfectly fine. All of your formulas will be exactly the same. If you're using a different spreadsheet program, you may find that some of the formulas are different enough that you'll have to look them up. So if you can use either Excel or Sheets, that would be the easiest as far as following along goes. So first thing, just kind of a general overview of what the end product will look like. Off to the side here, theoretically, I have a bunch of marks for first year algebra students. I've gone through finding the minimum in the group, the minimum being the 17.2 and the maximum, and that allowed me to find a range of values that I needed to split. So I had basically 80 values that I had to cover. And going through then, I decided that I would start my first class here at 17 and go up to 27. So essentially I chose 8 groups here of about 10 marks each. Built the frequency table, and then from that, the histogram. Now, the first thing to note here is because I'm dealing with marks or actual grades, some of these groupings don't make a lot of sense. Having a class that has some failing marks and some passing marks in it does not make sense. But if these were just numbers where the divisions aren't that significant, this would be my process. Find the minimum, find the maximum, determine how many values that is that I need to cover, and find a nice number of classes to choose. 8 groups of 10, 10 groups of 8, both work pretty nicely with a range of about 80 values. Here, because the numbers in the 40s range and the 50s range are significantly different, I'm going to choose somewhat different classes here, more meaningful classes specifically in this case. But again, if the numbers are just general numbers, then this is a reasonable process to go through. So we're going to go through it together. Again, initially, I just have a series of marks here off to the side. You'll see most of them, of course, have zeros on the end because originally there weren't decimals and I got tired of retyping them. I'm going to go through the same idea. If I don't know what my range of values are, I do need to find a way to determine sort of where to start my group and where to end my groups. So here, I'm going to go ahead and determine the minimum. And the minimum equation for in Excel or in Sheets is just equals min. And then basically, we select the range of values that we're interested in. So here I'm just highlighting with my mouse. I'll left click and drag until I have all the numbers that I'm interested in highlighted, and I can just hit enter after that, 17.2. Similarly with the maximum, I can type equals max. This time I'll do it a little differently just to show the second option. Because my data is all in these first few columns, I can also just click on the first column and again highlight across using the mouse. So basically click at the top of the column, left click, and then drag across. And now I've got basically the maximum value from all of the columns A through H. I can close my bracket, but again, I don't really have to. I can just hit enter and it knows to close it for me. Now this time, because I'm choosing my classes based on how those marks group logically, my range isn't going to actually come into play in creating the histogram, but I should still have it on here. And so the range is just going to be the maximum minus the minimum. And again, that just tells me sort of how many values are being covered. So coming down here, typically now, if we're creating a frequency chart, what we would do is we would go through all of our list and count how many values are in the 10 to 20 range, and then count how many values are in the 20 to 30 range. With the spreadsheet, it's going to be easier to go the other way. Start with the cumulative and work backwards. And so what we saw on the previous page was I had something like less than 27 here. I'm going to do less than 20 in this case. This is an extra column that we didn't have in our regular frequency charts on paper because it's the value we're going to use to actually calculate in the spreadsheet. So the These three columns will be our frequency chart that we're used to, and this is just kind of the extra bit of data that's going to help to develop that. And you may have noticed kind of as I typed this, it sort of suggested less than 40, less than 50, and so on. Excel does a really good job of allowing me to sort of start typing a column and then predict what's going to happen next. So I've typed a couple of values here, and if I just grab this corner and drag it down, it should, yay, fill in all the others. Now basically that's the value I'm going to use. I'm going to use it to allow me to search in my list for how many values there are in the range that I'm interested in. So I'm going to use a formula called COUNTIF. And COUNTIF does exactly what it says. Count the cell if it meets whatever criteria I'm going to set. So I'm going to COUNTIF. I'm checking the range of values, again, columns A through H. Because there's nothing below that is not part of the data, I can do this. So if you're setting up a spreadsheet on your own later on, you try to set each column to be one thing. So this column A has marks in it. There's nothing hidden down below that I wouldn't want included in my count here. I'm going to count if anything in A to H, and then comma has the criteria that it's meeting in M to M11. Okay, so sort of take a look at that again. I'll maybe click up here and see if I can get it to show up a little bit better. Oh, there it is right there. So COUNTIF says count the cell if, and again, the range of values are just everything in the A through H column. If they meet whatever M11 says, and M11 says I want values less than 20. Now, as I continue down, I'm going to have basically that same formula. So once again, I can do one of two things. I can grab my corner here and drag down, and that will fill in the columns as we go. We can also, if we sort of don't remember that, just do a typical computer thing, copy paste. So I'm copying here by pressing Control C. I'm highlighting either with my keyboard or with my mouse, and Control V to paste. Last option, I suppose, Control C to copy, highlight, right click, paste. So again, anything you can do on any computer, you should be doing in Excel. You will never want to retype things. And if you do, you're probably not only doing it wrong, but setting yourself up to make mistakes. At the very least, you're making yourself tons of extra work. So get used to copying and pasting. And what you can notice here as we go down maybe and look at this one, I'm going to click on the cell here. The formula has been adjusted automatically. So sort of COUNTIF still the same, A to H still the same, but now it's looking at cell M14. So M14 is this cell right here. And so when I copy and paste my formula, it knows the intent is most likely to be that I'm going to refer to the next cell over on each row. And so it adjusts automatically and everything's good. So it says I have 200. So what it was? Yeah, okay. It says I have 200 pieces of data overall. Now, working backwards a little bit more, cumulative frequency, again, is kind of your running total. There are 6 values that are less than 30. There are 200 values that are less than 100. I will point out here that I've essentially eliminated the hundreds from my list. My class here says 90 is in with the square bracket, 100 is out with the rounded bracket. Because I knew, of course, my maximum value is 96, that's okay. We don't have any hundreds. We don't have to worry about that. But do note that the 100 does not exist in this grouping. Just like here, the 90 is not in this grouping. The 50 is not in this grouping, so all the numbers in here are less than 50. They are failing marks. And that, again, was a sensible way to split this up. Finishing up our frequency chart now. Typically, we add up or we count up our frequencies to begin, and then we add them to get our cumulative frequencies. Because we have the cumulative frequencies now, I'm going to actually subtract to figure out what each individual frequency is. So my first frequency is just this. We know that the value is less than 20. There are 2 of them. That means that there are 2 values in the range 10 through 20, knowing that my minimum value from before was 17.2. This next grouping, though, there are not 6 items or 6 marks within the range 20 to 30. There are only 4. 6 is the number of values less than 30. 2 of them were in the previous group. And so what I'm going to do here is basically just subtract these 2 values. The number that goes in the frequency for this class is the 6 minus the 2. But again, I'm always going to refer to the locations where these things are so that if numbers change later on, the computer will just adjust them for me. And then this formula now is the same one that I need in all these other spots. So once again, I will copy, highlight. Maybe I'll point this out though. When I copy here, I'm copying this cell, and then I'm starting my highlight below because I want to copy into that spot and paste. Again, alternatively, we can simply grab this corner, drag it down, and we see the same thing. So now we have 2 items in the first grouping, 4 in this one, and assumedly, if we add those all up, we would see there are 200 altogether. So now my frequency chart is built. The last thing to do is use that information in my histogram. Now the cumulative frequency doesn't really come into play in the histogram itself, it's just these 2 columns. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to highlight just the data because the titles on these lines don't have any meaning and I don't want them on my chart. If they were meaningful enough, frequency is fine, but there's nothing here. I suppose I could try putting in marks here and just see how it looks. I may choose to change those afterwards anyways. So now I'm going to highlight the data I want to put into my chart. I'm going to insert, and I'm going to choose a bar chart here. And probably the very first option makes the most sense. I will tell you that there is a histogram option in Excel. It doesn't work very well, and we don't want to use it. So please don't go looking for it because it does a lousy job. Now, this is what I ended up with, and we can sort of see the frequency is not a good title here. So I'm going to change this to first year algebra marks. We understand that it's because it's a histogram, these are counts off to the side, so we really don't need a label on the side here. I'm surprised I didn't get my marks title at the bottom, but that's fine. I'm going to, I can do a little bit of editing to this just to make it look a little bit nicer. Sorry, I can't quite fit it perfectly on the screen. I'll highlight these or just click on these and change the size of the font to be, ooh, that's neat. Just a little bit bigger so that it looks a little nicer. And then the big thing is in Excel, we can make this look more histogrammy. In Google Sheets, you won't be able to do this last step, but if you're in Excel, you're going to right click on one of the bars. You're going to go to Format Data Series, and we're going to take this gap out. So gap width right now is 219%. We're going to take it right down to 0. And that's going to get us the look that we want for a histogram. First year algebra marks, we've got the classes showing nicely at the bottom, the counts off to the side, should be pretty obvious. And that seems like a good place to stop.